While you are enjoying your lunch, I do want you to continue, but I did want to keep this program moving forward because we have a great luncheon presentation. And I just, again, another moment, there's been a slideshow running through of all the sponsors. So again, thank you, sponsors. Really appreciate the effort and the investment in this conference, as well as all those that have been involved with the planning committee, and not to mention all the speakers that have been involved with moderating, speaking, and again, putting in all that activity going on in the other side of the building here. With that, today's luncheon presentation is a 2024 report card for Oregon's infrastructure. Tijerina Esquino is an engineer at Mott MacDonald, has more than 10 years experience in project financing and engineering, working on multi-million-dollar ports and transit projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. Now, in addition to her day job at Mott MacDonald, she's been active member of the Oregon Society of American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, for those of you engineer types that know that acronym. She's going to be presenting today, so with that, join us, Anna.
Thank you so much, and I am so excited to be here with you today to talk about the 2024 report card for Oregon's infrastructure. Now, before I get started with the report card, I will introduce myself. My name is Tijerina Esquino. So great pronunciation. That's very good. I have been working as a port and rail engineer with Mott MacDonald here out of the Portland office. And with their support, I actually am now a graduate research assistant with PSU's Institute for Sustainable Solutions. So that is a little bit about me. Now, aside from the things that I do at work, I have been a volunteer with ASCE for nearly 9 years now. For those of you that don't know the American Society of Civil Engineers, it is the oldest and largest civil engineering society in the nation. It was founded in New York in 1852, and it has more than 160,000 members worldwide. I always like to put the map in there because though we are the American Society of Civil Engineers, we are an international organization. Now, I am a part of the Oregon section of ASCE, which is one of the oldest state sections in our society. We were established in 1913 as the Portland chapter and eventually became the Oregon section. We have nearly 2,500 members across the state, with 2 branches, 4 student groups, and 3 younger member groups. Now, one of the things that we do at ASCE is raise awareness and advocate for our infrastructure. We do this in a lot of ways. One of them is that we go to DC once a year for our legislative fly-in, and we talk to our legislators there. But one of the most important tools that we use in the American Society of Civil Engineers is our report card. We do report cards both for the nation and state by state. So today we're going to talk about the Oregon State Report Card. Now, I have to say that the report card process is an entirely volunteer-led effort. It took over 30 infrastructure professionals, primarily civil engineers, throughout the state to do all the research, data compilation, and writing that brings about the report card. Thankfully today, you're actually going to get the chance to talk not just to me, but to some of our other report card chapter leads that are here, and I'll introduce later on in my talk. So how do we have an infrastructure report card? This is the basis of our methodology. All of the ASCE report cards are assessed on these 8 key criteria, and they offer us a snapshot in time, both for the current condition of our infrastructure, as well as its ability to meet our needs well into the future. So some of the things that we look at is, does the infrastructure meet our current needs? What is the cost to improve our infrastructure? And is our funding able to cover that cost? So I love the report card format because it is relatively easy to digest. I got report cards, hopefully no grades like a C or below, but I know generally what an A means. Well, this is what the grades mean for us and for infrastructure, with A being fit for the future, F being failing or critical. So where are we in Oregon? The 2024 report card for Oregon's infrastructure gave the state a C-. A C- is the same grade that we got in 2019 when we last did our report card, and it is the same grade that the nation got in 2021. Not exactly the grades that I would be that I would be proud to bring home to my parents. Now let's dig into the specifics here. We're going to start off with transportation. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, transportation funding continues to be a huge issue in Oregon. We have gotten much needed funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Keep Oregon Moving Act. But this funding sources are not bringing nearly enough to meet our current needs. Now, when we don't have enough funding to pay for our infrastructure, we do suffer. And right now, our transportation system is primarily paid for, especially roads and bridges, by the gas tax. Now, I'm sure that many of you here drove in a car. I like doing this test. Who here drove in a hybrid or electric vehicle? I drove my hybrid here today. Yeah, so that's actually one of the reasons that we have this reducing power in our gas tax. The Oregon Department of Transportation actually thinks that this is going to be the last year that they see an increase in revenue. And as we tend toward electrification, something that I want to do, something that the state wants to do, we are only going to see further decreases in that gas tax. That is, of course, coupled with the fact that our costs have gone up, both the labor costs and the cost for materials, certainly from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also just generally. So, in fact, right now, ODOT says that it will have a $720 million funding deficit by 2027 if they do not get a long-term funding solution. So what does this look like in our infrastructure? Let's start with bridges. Now, about 5% of Oregon's bridges are in poor condition. This is according to the National Bridge Database that you can actually look up yourself. Now, that is lower than the national average, 5%. But the age of our bridges presents a problem immediately down the road. We have a lot of nearly poor bridges in our state. Actually, more than half of the bridges in Oregon are more than 50 years old and are approaching the end of their design life. That means that at minimum, the operation and maintenance costs for those bridges will increase, and we will start to need to replace and rehabilitate them. Unfortunately, as of the 2023 Oregon Department of Transportation Bridge Report, only 3 new bridges are replacing old structures right now. At that rate, we would need to have every bridge in Oregon last for 900 years. That would far exceed their service life, and honestly, I think it is kind of ridiculous, even just at the face. Now, ODOT says right now that to maintain current bridge conditions, they need $320 million. Right now, it's receiving $156, a little less than their stated need, a little less than half their stated need. Now, moving on to roads. The grade for roads also dropped. It dropped to a C- in the 2024 report card compared to our C in 2019. Now, over the last few years, the percentage of state highways in Oregon in poor condition has increased moderately from 10 to 12%. The percentage of roads in good condition has also decreased from 65% to 58% in this year's report card. Now, poor road conditions come at a big cost for drivers, of course. Each person in Oregon actually pays, on average, around $266 a year in extra repair and operating costs because of things like potholes. That cost in this state adds up to $780 million a year. And it's clearly all money we could be spending elsewhere. Now, unfortunately, underfunding these transportation systems not only has economic consequences, but creates serious safety hazards for our consumers. we have seen a scary increase in the rate of fatalities in our state. And here on the graph, you see the reported fatal crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled for Oregon compared to the nation. Of course, the nation also saw an increase. The fatalities for the nation have started to decrease. They have not for our state. Moving on to transit. This is the first time our report card had a transit chapter. And I'm glad to tell you that the first transit chapter in Oregon got a D+. Now, I was a person that used to hear from people in Oregon talk about how our transportation system and our transit system was going to be such a good example. People used to visit Oregon, the Governors Association, to ride the streetcar and the M.ASCE. Unfortunately, Oregon doesn't have a consistent source of state funding for transit. Looking for new funding streams in the Portland metro region, they developed the Urban Mobility Strategy, which included projects such as the I-205 toll project. That project is now paused. That said, what's been happening in our transit systems? Well, in 2023, the Portland metro region alone saw 49.3 million boarding rides on TriMet's buses and light rail systems. I am one of those boarding rides. Ridership has not completely recovered from the COVID pandemic, but at least for TriMet, their ridership has steadily grown over the last few years. Unfortunately, as demand for transit has returned, agencies have struggled to operate and maintain their systems at pre-pandemic levels. There has been a really good influx of federal funding that has provided a lifeline for many of these agencies, but we do not have a sustainable funding source well into the future. Now we're going to shift from talking about our road transit and roadway transportation to our waterways and airways. Now, we did do an inland waterways, a ports chapter in aviation. Aviation, we unfortunately were not able to do in 2019, but we're gonna start off talking about inland waterways. Now, Oregon is home to two major waterways, the Columbia and the Willamette River, and they're both used to move goods and agricultural products. In addition, we have 12 coastal ports and harbors for Oregon's coast that support cargo, commercial fishing, and recreation. In 2021, waterborne commerce via Oregon's 5 deep draft ports was 18.6 million tons and valued at $13.8 billion. Actually, over 80,000 jobs are supported by the goods that we export from Oregon. Now, Oregon's inland waterway network and harbors currently do have sufficient capacity, and they're in adequate condition to move our current cargo. But as trends for heavier cargo and larger vessels move into the future, we will have to see whether our deep draft channels can fully accommodate these larger vessels, and there may need to be additional deepening to make sure that our facilities are viable in the future. Working in tandem with our inland waterways are Oregon's ports. Now, Oregon has 23 public ports, and they are all a critical component of our state's multimodal freight transportation system. Unfortunately, many ports in our state are operating with facilities that are decades past their design lives. And they will need to be upgraded to accommodate these next generation larger ships. Now, many ports also have significant resiliency issues that they need to address, and they threaten our ability to effectively respond to a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake event. Aviation. All right, now, I know we are right next to PDX, but I want to remind you that Oregon actually has 97 airports, ranging from large commercial airports to rural airstrips. And every single one of those airports is quite vital to Oregon's economic development and the ability to connect our people and goods to local, national, and global levels. Now, the condition of most pavements and facilities in our airports are satisfactory to good at this time. That is a good news. But the current funding mechanisms, particularly for our rural and small communities, are unlikely to meet our long-term needs. Additionally, many airports now play a critical role in our state for fighting wildfires, as well as face significant resiliency issues, whether they're at the coast or due to severe flooding. Now, annual commercial operations and enplanements, that is the number of passengers boarding a plane at any individual airport, are continuing to grow in our region. Actually, other than PDX and Rogue Valley International, our 2023 operation and enplanement levels are above 2019 levels, though still behind initial projections. Now, shifting the discussion to our water systems. Communities are now having to deal with new contaminants, aging pipelines, and severe weather. Oregon has taken some necessary steps to ensure that people have safe, reliable drinking water sources, and to make sure that our systems are resilient to the challenges down the road. Because of that, both drinking water and wastewater actually saw an increase in their grades in this report card. This was the first year that our section did a report card on stormwater. Starting with drinking water. Now, some 4.3 million residents are served by Oregon's approximately 2,500 public water systems. That leaves around 400,000 Oregonians, roughly 10% of the state, to source their own primary source of drinking water. So we mentioned how the grade went up this year one level to a C. Currently, more than 99% of Oregon's drinking water meets the EPA standards for safe drinking water. Water systems in the state have stable supplies and are generally capable of handling future growth. Much of Oregon's water network is relatively new, and that is a great news for us because most of our water lines were installed within the last 50 years. Now, why is that such good news? Partially because now as the EPA is going to require the removal of lead service lines, they estimate that in Oregon we only have around 3,500 water lines made from lead. That is less than 1% of our water lines. However, water systems are preparing for other new rules that will require them to monitor dangerous levels of forever chemicals, or PFASs. Now, that will bring already added costs to underfunded water utilities. The report card actually found that across the state, our water systems will need up to $10 billion in additional funding to ensure everyone can have safe and reliable drinking water. Now let's talk about wastewater. I loved the artificial intelligence videos because I have seen some terrible pipes. And this is, it all matters. But so Oregon's wastewater grade did go up one level again to a D+. The biggest challenge for our wastewater is the lack of funding. Most of these utilities, drinking water and wastewater, rely very heavily on user fees for both their day-to-day operations and large capital projects, which makes repairs or upgrades challenging to finance, especially for those smaller communities. Now, following recent rate hikes, the City of Portland's sewer rates now exceed the EPA's affordability target by 5%, considering the median household income of their service areas. And more service hikes on the area of 3 to 5% are anticipated. That is still well below the unaffordability index that EPA has, but is a concern if it is our primary sourcing of funding. Now let's talk about stormwater. For stormwater as well, there are new regulatory requirements that protect stream health from the impacts of stormwater runoff. Now these are typically paid for by new development because there is a shortage of other funding sources. This means that our cool, innovative approaches, such as our green infrastructure for managing stormwater runoff, are implemented in new communities. While communities and neighborhoods built before 1990 typically send their runoff directly to local streams without treatment or detention. The state has unfortunately not invested in stormwater retrofits, which leaves communities looking to individual ratepayers and federal funding sources to meet regulatory mandates and improve water quality. Now, most state agencies with a stormwater utility have seen steady increases in their rates. However, despite their rising rates, most agencies surveyed indicated a lack of sufficient funding for their growing maintenance needs and a backlog of necessary system improvements. You're quite all right. Now, moving on to energy. One theme you may have found me talking about is the need to improve the resiliency of our infrastructure systems. And that is very apparent in our energy systems. We are seeing the effects of higher temperatures, more frequent and severe storms, and potential flooding. And all of our infrastructure systems need to be upgraded to withstand those conditions, both the conditions that we see now and those we can expect into the future. In addition to this, Oregon's location near the Cascadia subduction zone means a strong and damaging earthquake is a matter of when, not if. Before I talk more about energy, I want to show you a little bit about what our energy system is and really thank the people at the Oregon Department of Energy for these wonderful graphics. I love this energy flow because it shows both the energy that we have within the state, that which we have to import, and really all of where our energy flows and goes. As you might be able to tell, entirely all of the natural gas that we use in the state and all the petroleum and all of the coal are imported from out of state. Now, this is another diagram that they have, and it shows the energy use for the state. So, of course, that 26% of coal, that 21% of natural gas is 100% imported from out of state. Now, as I mentioned, the Oregon's power system is one place where older infrastructure could cause problems in the event of a catastrophic earthquake. Much of our energy distribution network would suffer extensive damage in the event of an earthquake, and a lack of redundancy means that we would have prolonged power outages while the crews work to rebuild the grid. Now, Oregon leaders are already acting by developing the Oregon Energy Security Plan, which I am told comes out in just a few days. I won't say it's before the 30th, but it is due on the 30th to the legislator. Now, even though this important work has been started and it is a reason for an upgrade in our energy grades, the work to make the grid more resilient will not happen overnight. It will take time. So here is a glimpse as to what we found of the general conditions of our infrastructure and energy. Here I have it split up by electricity, natural gas, and liquid fuels. And we have generation, our state's ability to create that power, transmission, the ability to move power large distances, and then the distribution that actually brings the power from those transmission lines into individual homes and businesses. So for electricity, we have adequate generation capacity, and we actually, because of our geography, are well situated for renewable energy in this state. For distribution, generally adequate, and with PGE making upgrades to make sure more tree trimmings are happening, we should see more reliability from the distribution system. Unfortunately, our transmission system for electricity is now strained, and that means that we will be unable to bring more renewable projects online if we cannot move the energy to the communities that need them. Natural gas, generally we found we have sufficient generation, again, out of state, and adequate distribution. There are currently some projects increasing capacity for their transmission. Of particular concern in Oregon is our liquid fuel supplies. Petroleum is the state's most vulnerable and least resilient energy sector due to their low redundancy, their existing conditions, and a lack of seismic safety preparedness. A particular concern is Oregon's critical energy infrastructure hub, which is a 6-mile stretch on the lower Willamette that contains a significant percentage of the state's liquid fuel, natural gas, and electrical infrastructure. Actually, over 90% of the liquid fuel that comes into the state passes through the CEI hub. And the critical energy infrastructure hub is situated on liquefiable soils, meaning that those soils can tend to lose some or all of their strength in the event of an earthquake. Thankfully, Oregon in 2022 passed Senate Bill 1567, which gave Oregon Department of Environmental Quality the authority to develop a program that evaluates the vulnerability of our fuel tank systems and requires facilities to develop a plan to mitigate risk. If those mitigations are completed, we see the grade of infrastructure increasing even further. One more thing to mention with our energy system. For liquid fuels, the distribution network is the roads. So, of course, all of our infrastructures are quite interdependent, but we have to lift up the condition of our roads to make sure that we can get fuel in extreme weather events to the communities that need them as well. So just to say, energy infrastructure sometimes looks like all the other infrastructure as well. Now let's talk about dams. Dams received a D+ grade, which is unchanged from the last report card. That said, we do see some good trends. Right now, 2/3 of the state's dams are more than 50 years old, and that number increases every year. The dams were mostly built before modern seismic codes, and that means that they may be destroyed or damaged in a large earthquake. Older dams may also not be able to withstand the extreme weather events that we're already experiencing. Most dams are privately owned, and that means it is up to the owner to pay for and complete any repairs or upgrades needed to ensure public safety. Oregon has slightly improved the funding for safety regulation of existing dams, and it has implemented emergency action plans for all 76 state-regulated high-hazard dams. And I will make a note here about what high hazard means. High hazard is about a potential of a dam failure to cause a loss of life. It is not a reflection of a dam's condition at that moment. Just want to make that clear. We don't necessarily have 171 dams that are about to fall. Okay. I know all the dam engineers are probably like, thank you, define that. Okay. All right. Now to talk about schools. This is the first year that we tried to include a schools chapter in our report card. And as you might have noticed, that's not an A, B, C, D, or F. We gave schools an incomplete. As you might have remembered, we described the methodology that ASCE uses in order to assign a grade. That is that 8 criteria: capacity, condition, funding, future need. And if ASCE cannot find the information to assess any one of those categories, we do not give a grade. Unfortunately, in the state of Oregon, we do not have good information as to the condition of our school facilities. And while operational funding is equalized per student statewide, infrastructure capital funding for schools is mostly the responsibility of individual districts, which means that they're dependent on community support for bond measures that pass and generally mirror regional household income data. Now, aside from the lack of information that we have on our school facilities, Oregon schools are also often designated as emergency shelters for the public. But we do not have systematic assessments of their ability to serve this purpose after natural disasters, especially earthquakes. So what do we intend to do about it? The reason that we do the report card is because we want this to be a catalyst for action. Now, if you go and read our full report, you'll see that we have recommendations for every infrastructure category. So energy will have its own recommendations, roads will have their own recommendations. And then we review all of the infrastructure categories and assign recommendations for the full state. And these are the ASCE's recommendations for infrastructure in Oregon. Secure dedicated and sustainable funding sources to ensure long-term maintenance and improvement of Oregon's infrastructure. Focus on resilient long-term sources rather than short-term influxes of money. 2, we want to see the enhanced resilience of our infrastructure system against natural and man-made disasters. We would hope it is by implementing an all-hazard comprehensive risk assessment process that evaluates the event likelihood and consequences, considers interdependencies and vulnerabilities, encourages mitigation strategies, monitors outcomes, and addresses recovery and return to service. This approach, we believe, is essential for the region to prepare for the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and other threats. 3, we want to see the enforcement and strengthening of regulations to ensure the public safety and resiliency of our critical infrastructure. We want to properly implement emergency action plans for high-hazard dams, Oregon Energy Secure Plan recommendations, and new regulations requiring seismic vulnerability assessments and mitigations for large fuel handling facilities. 4, we want to develop and implement asset management programs that utilize life cycle cost considerations, identify and prioritize critical system components, conduct condition assessments, establish operation and maintenance plans, And we believe this approach will both prioritize essential repairs and replacement projects, as well as facilitate for the long-term capital budgeting. Now, our last recommendation is for us to invest in workforce development and public participation in infrastructure. We want to address the skilled workforce shortage, and that is going to be construction trades, civil engineers. It is really across our whole realm of infrastructure. And then we also want to increase public participation in our infrastructure process. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a glimpse as to how we compare to the nation. In 2021, as I mentioned, the nation got a C- on its infrastructure grade. You could see they're doing better than us on some categories, worse than others. What does this really mean for people? Well, aside from the report cards, we at the American Society of Civil Engineers also have economic studies on our AF years. And in 2021, we found that America's overdue infrastructure bill was costing American households $3,300 a year. Now, thankfully, we got action on the federal level, and much of the action on the federal level followed ASCE recommendations. So we had a new economic study this year, and we considered two different scenarios. We considered a continuing to act scenario that sees what would happen if the bipartisan infrastructure law, so that IIJA funding, becomes our new baseline. And two, the scenario that we snap back and they revert to the funding levels before our bipartisan infrastructure law. Well, ASCE found that by continuing to act, American households would save, on average, $700 a year. That to say, I showed you the 2021 National Infrastructure Report Card. Well, it's a pretty exciting time for me and ASCE because we are also going to release our updated National Report Card this upcoming March. I really do hope that in this March, when this report card comes out, you will tune in and join us in a conversation about our infrastructure. I certainly am interested to see how Oregon is stacking up against the nation now that we've seen some infrastructure money. Now, we're going to reserve some time for questions with some of our chapter authors. I will tell you that aside from chairing the Oregon Infrastructure Report Card, I wrote the energy chapter, but I brought some other chapter leads to also discuss with you today. So I'm going to give them a brief introduction, and as I introduce you, if you would like to stand, and then we can get on to our questions. Dun, dun. Sorry about that. Oh, I want to say your full bio. Okay. So Dr. Hanmin Wang is a civil engineer at Mott McDonald. So he's actually my coworker. He has a PhD from the University of Buffalo and focuses on asset management, bridge rehabilitation, seismic vulnerability assessments. And Hanmin wrote our bridges chapter. Thank you very much. Oh, I know I had your bios in here. Okay. So next up, we have Perrin Faulkner. Perrin Faulkner is a transportation engineer at Tool Design. She is passionate about sustainable design and designing for communities. I found it. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, project engineer at Tool Design who sees boosting alternative transportation options as one way to pursue her passion for sustainability. She also serves on ASCE's Committee for Sustainability. She actually didn't write that, I just happen to know it. Perrin's experience in transportation designs includes complete streets redesign, bikeways, trails, transit, and micro-mobility. From her time working, studying, and living in various U.S. states and abroad, Perrin has a strong appreciation of the importance of a tailored community-based approach to design and create accessible and vibrant places. Perrin was the lead for our transit chapter. Thank you, Perrin. I'm going to apologize to you all because I'm going to just mention Dr. Hanman Wang, structural engineer, specializing in seismic risk assessment, deterioration modeling, and performance-based design of bridges. Apologies for the first time. All right. Tom here is retired from the Port of Portland, where he served as the director of engineering. He has remained an incredibly active volunteer and community advocate, serving on the Clackamas County Planning Commission, the Portland Public Schools Bond Accountability Commission, the Pittock Mansion Preservation Committee, the Children's Healing Art Program, and of course, our report card committee, where he led not only airports, ports, inland waterways, and helped with other chapters. Thank you so much, Tom. Last but not least, London Howell Farley is a transportation engineer with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. She is also our incoming president for our Younger Member Forum here in Portland for the American Society of Civil Engineers. London is a Portland native and passionate about accessible design and safety in our communities. So London, aside from helping on general committee business, also led the roads chapter and worked on transit as well. So we're going to have just a little bit of time reserved for all of you to come and ask us questions. We have the chapter authors that I introduced here at the front. And then, of course, if there is a question that I cannot answer for you, we'll make our best to connect you with the individual that can answer that question. All right. And then thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, Anna, for that great presentation. A lot there to unpack in that report. And I really appreciate those chapter leads that really are here to answer questions. So we've got a little bit of a break that you'll either be here, up here, or in the, right here, or in the table right out here. So if you want to ask some questions in detail about their specific work, feel free to do that. And then we do have the next series of breakout sessions. And then I encourage you to come back for the wrap-up session back here. And it's the Perspectives on Infrastructure. And we have a great guest, Mark McMullen, who is with the Common Sense Institute, former chief economist for the state of Oregon, the longest chief economist I think the state's had. And that'll be a little moderated session here at the end. So again, we've got about 15 minutes or so for questions in the back. And thank you, Anna. Again, thank you, chapter leads.